I would like to welcome the speakers for the session, Mr. M.S. Ravi Kumar, Country Leader, Integrated Supply Chain at WAPCO India Limited, Mr. Tom Flack, President and Chief Purchasing Officer at Tata Motors, and the moderator of the session will be Mr. Hemal and Thakkar, who's Director at CRISIL Limited. Over to you, Hemal, to take it forward.
Thanks, Rohit, for that kind introduction. Welcome, Tom, and welcome, Mr. Ravi. The topic today is very, very interesting. Especially the commercial vehicle industry, if you see, has been through some torrid times in the last 18 months or so. Especially post 2019, 2020 was a year of slowing economy, and then 2021 COVID hit us, and in 2022 again we've had the second wave. Also, there have been several other regulations like axle load norms, GST e-way bill coming in, infrastructure spends by the government. So there are certain things which have led to a positive effect on the industry, like infrastructure spends, etc. But there have also been dampeners like axle load norm, and then further followed by things like COVID. We just put a brake on the industry so far. What we would want to understand today is, COVID has brought the entire industry to a standstill last year, especially when there was a initial lockdown throughout the country. Now, I'm sure it would not have been difficult it would have been very difficult for you guys to restart and start productions, because it's not like a start-stop switch. It takes a hell lot of time, and especially to align the entire chain, it takes a lot of time. So what are the steps, that you have taken to ensure seamless supply, once the lockdown opened, especially post, the lockdown, kind of opened up? Because, there was still a fear of, employees contracting COVID, restrictions on how many number of employees can work per shift. There were no physical meetings that you guys could have, between OEMs and suppliers. So you all needed to come together through a virtual meeting, more like what we are doing today, through Zoom calls, through Teams, etc. So how did you overcome, these challenges? And, how did the sourcing shape up over a period of time? If I have to ask that to you, maybe Tom, to start with you first, and then Mr. Ravi Kumar, if you could throw some light on it.
So it's an interesting question of a point of reflection, I suppose. But I mean, the practical part was it became tactical for, I think, all of us. We've never shut down the entire industry. So there was no precedent. I think again, tactical part of it was to overcome the oddity of the moment, not really knowing when it ended. At least in our case, our company went into the point of trying to actually sustain itself. And so we addressed immediately a plan of sustenance, survival. One of the key factors, I think, for industry is to move cash. And so we went after a campaign to push as much cash out into the supply chain as we could by creating a discounted bill discounting scheme. What does that mean? We took a discounting scheme and offered it to everybody, and then we cut the rate in half so everybody would use it, pull cash from us through these third parties and get some cash, and there was an immediate buffer play. We created a task force for every supplier site in the country, cross-functional teams that worked virtually to connect, and then that's the tactical stuff. I think the supplier sites were kind of amazing. Everybody was sort of working through the labor issue. Labor was the biggest sort of factor. Labor exacerbated by the ability to get people to overcome the fear. So you had the labor just not there anymore, how to get back, when should I go back? And then you had the fear factors that were popping up. So, I mean, it was a terrible thing to look back on and say you could learn something from it. But I think the task forces, the financial interjections that we did, that's creating a discounting scheme, those things will carry on. The idea of restart operations, the idea of safety protocols, those are really healthy things. So when we went through the restart, there's some good learnings that I think all of our industry took away from that. Never done that before, never restarted, 2,000 sites to make a car or a truck in this case. And the safety protocols are lingering, and it's a good thing, very good thing. So I think all of those are pieces that came together. There's this conversation go on for hours because there's tales about raw material supply or long-term part supply that we're also feeling the effects of. So to me, those were also a dominating force in terms of, survival, protect yourself. That's a reaction to the lockdown with no duration defined. And then there's the restart. Okay, let's go back up again. But oops, did I order the right quantum of materials to support this? What is restart? How much volume are you talking? What's the market going to do? So I think those are all enormous factors. To be honest, as an OEM, it's really hard to give direct guidance with clarity. So people were asking for absolute answers, resolute. What are you going to do? What's going to happen? And we gave those. Were we clear or resolute in our own thinking? The truth is not really. We were working our way through scenarios. So is that something you can learn from as well? I'm not sure about that part, but I think a lot of the suppliers were feeding off of, I'll call it the confidence we were trying to project. You've seen the adage of a duck on top of the water, nice and calm. That was us. Underneath, we were paddling like crazy and we're scared to death because we also, like everyone else, we had the potential of running out of cash too. So I think, things worked out. We can look back at this and say we did a great job, but, in the throes of that moment, Hemal, it was horrifying. And we didn't want everyone to feel the same way as an industry. So so that was the reaction. A lot of good learnings though, as you take away from that.
But, if I may have to ask, there were no physical meetings between you and the suppliers, which usually is the case.
Never.
That made things a little more difficult, in a virtual world as compared to earlier.
I have to say this though. So, we have some great supplier partners and we all had a common goal, which is to get back to living. So we weren't worried about people's motivation. So virtual became very efficient in that context.
Fantastic.
Became very efficient. So yeah, we were able to get a lot done with virtual meetings. Surprised ourselves, to be honest. I think all of us. And again, with a common goal like that, let's get back to business, right? So turn the water back on. Let's go. I think that the energy of the restarts were very prominent. So no, we didn't have a challenge. I think we all surprised ourselves with the virtual effectiveness.
Mr. Ravi Kumar.
Yeah, first I would like to thank the CVF for being as part of this event and also to be opportunity to be on this panel alongside our largest and estimated customer, Tata Motors. So, Mr. Black, we are proud to be associated as your supply partner. Thank you. And coming to this your question, I think these are truly unprecedented times. Never ever we imagined to have stopped. Normally we are concerned about a minute, but then we have to, for a day or for a week. So, but then we had a lot of learnings. But I think any other manufacturing organization, we have also got the difficulty, gone through the difficult recovery and restart curve, I would say. Right. So every action we made the plan that was put first was to employee first approach, I would say, not only in our factories, but also on the supply chain. So whatever the good practices that we had, like the standard protocols, the golden rules, and then to the the adherence to the national or the state, local, plus our set of corporate guidelines, etc. That was also taken practice to the supply chain. We also taken to them, and thanks to the I would say the virtual meeting, so we are able to cascade across the supply chain. So we had to set up a war room to build visibility across the supply chain, across the pan India. Because we had certain cases, we had issues in South, we did not have it North, etc. But then we also had, I would say, a good practice earlier of having the manufacturing footprint strategy. So that has helped us really, in the sense we are able to protect our customers. So a lot of planning, I would say, had gone during that times because I would say during the times of crisis, only the leadership is seen. So I think a lot of planning has gone to de-risk and then complete to a de-risk assessment. So since then, I would say we have been focusing on actions to build in kind of a stability in the whole process, be it the downstream or the upstream supply chain. So I would say the lessons learned could be the focus on much more on the planning and then the, let's say, de-risking or the risk assessment.
A related question there, if you ask me, in the pre-COVID era itself, we've seen that, digitization is something that every OEM had taken up, at a very rapid pace over the last couple of years, to transform businesses, improve productivity. There were AI-driven procurement processes, automatic bidding, kind of certain ways in which, you were in a position to forecast certain risks that would come your way and, kind of strengthen your entire purchasing process. But, with COVID coming in, the uncertainty only increased. And as Tom mentioned earlier, you could never, kind of predict as to what's going to happen tomorrow. Because, if you ask the marketing and sales team, what is it that you are seeing in terms of demand, they also do not have an answer because the entire market has not opened up. So in such a scenario, what are the technological changes that, you guys have undertaken despite this, kind of pandemic being in place? And, which has helped you in better sourcing or, kind of, which has helped you keep the supply chain seamless? And, and would you suggest that, these changes are here to stay or, what steps have you guys taken during that time in terms of technological changes?
Taking that question, I think, of course, those technology changes are here to stay. I would say the pandemic, one thing that has been driving is on the digitalization. So we not only from the, it starts with the in-house on the manufacturing. So we had a vision for the factory for the future. It started with all that thing because the supply chain has to start from there, from the factories. So on sourcing front, I would say we have gone more into data analytics, I would say, right? Okay. So I think that is the time when you had all those, also the time available, with all the executive time, etc. Then, so we had gone in for a full-fledged data analytics. So I think it helps us to optimize our cost of direct material. And we use the data analytics to have a predictive model for direct material. Okay. So today, if you see, we are increasingly adapting, I would say, linear performance pricing models to minimize the variations in the cost of components across the supply chain. So apart from the traditional of e-bidding, etc., which we have been doing in the past as well, right? So I would say the one focus area would be on the data analytics, the power of data analytics. You also train much more talents today on that. And second is also on the, because one of the learning is on the visibility of the supply chain. So we also upgraded our portals to create much more visibility on the supply chain and real-time performance, integrating with our, I would say, the production performance, the shop floor, IPM is what we call. So with that, we also linking to the supply chain. So these are, let's say, areas. On the other side, if you see, we're also adopting some of the simulation models like Pack Assistant, I would say, because it gives an optimized solution on the packaging yield, etc. So we're also using some simulation techniques tools like Pack Assistant. And we have gone for bots, so robotic process automation on some of the repetitive tasks on the supply chain, both in the warehousing. Today, we wanted to go in for the keyboard-less, I would say, supply chain, more focus on the RFIDs and the scanners. And then we are also working on a control tower on logistics, which helps us to give a visibility on the material movement. So see, these are some of the initiatives, I would say. Some of them are at an advanced stage at different levels of maturity. But these are triggered, I would say, most of them triggered during that time because of the, I would say, some of the learnings.
Interesting, very interesting, making, these times into an opportunity is something very heartening to see. Tom, your response or, your views on it. What is it that you guys have done at Tata Motors in terms of technology?
Well, I don't want to repeat Ravi Kumar's comments, but very similar reaction. I think there's probably a focus on modeling. When we say digitizing, there's a digital solution of analytics on the supply base and modeling that. And I think the point, and I'm certain it's in his plan too, but the point is to have predictive capabilities there. But I think we also all kind of woke up in a sense at that point. So if you all go back in time to when the original, COVID started in China, as we all, at least we as a world believe, but it started to us, when we actually, no longer had parts coming from China. So it was at that point that we turned on this, massive task force to model, parts into China. And then we presented that back to ourselves. And so what does that say? And then subsequently, we had a geopolitical dispute between our country and China. And we use that same model to model the world of supply chain through the tiers. And so, we woke up that day and realized that I'm actually buying a part out of Venezuela. Absolutely no visibility to that, and to be transparent to all of you. It's a real wake-up call that, as an industry, we do not have the ability to make quick moves. And so we then did an assessment of what we call equalizing or neutralizing the geopolitical risk across our enterprise of our company. And here we are with a company that fights to the death to actually localize technology into India. And here we are with 99% of our parts being made in India. But curiously, only 75% of the value is made in India, and there's a portion of it's been bought from somewhere else. And curiously, that's bought from somewhere else, and we don't have a line of sight on that, all of it. We're not exposed to currency agreements for some of those deals, and so when you leave it at that, and life carries on and no problems, you don't notice, and it's okay. And then when you have challenges in the supply chain itself, in any form, and now you have so many you can't keep count of them, you can actually see that leaving that alone, it was actually done as a default. So all of our partners have defaulted into buying their parts from somewhere because it made sense to them. And so on down the road, all made sense to them as a landed cost for their business to sell to somebody else, and they're optimizing that. But we as an industry do not do geopolitical de-risking. We just don't. And it's just too expensive to change once we set up, and then we get caught. And so there was a scary day when our government and the Chinese government said, close the borders, no shipments. And you sort of wake up at that point and say, so if that's true, when do we run out of parts? So you'd say, well, should I carry safety stocks? How do I plan for that? And so China's a fairly significant auto hub for the world now. Wasn't that way since 2010, but it's a real factor for all of us. And so just geopolitical mapping, and then waking up to this. And so I think what we learned is that we have now a 5-year sort of plan to geopolitically de-risk ourselves without what I'll call re-engineering everything. If I had to re-engineer everything, it would cost an enormous amount of money, and I would end up, basically moving parts around the world, forcing underutilization of old capacity, creation of new capacity, paying more money for parts, and then I would end up in the same position I have today. I would still get parts that look just the same, but from a different place. And so we had concluded as a company, at least, that we need to source our way into a geopolitically de-risked future, if that makes sense. That was a huge learning. Stepping onto the digital, that's to us the biggest digital takeaway wasn't just the modeling of it, but what you did with it. Sure.
That's a very important point, and especially in today's world where the global supply chains are far more integrated, as it was a couple of years compared to what it was a couple of years ago. And as you rightly said, where China, almost houses 50-60% of the overall, kind of supply in, either directly or indirectly. So it becomes a big challenge, to kind of take calls overnight and, kind of adjust to these uncertainties for a period of time. Right. One more question, related to this. If you see since October 20, I would say the costs of, base raw material or the basic raw material prices have also been increased. So I'm sure, that is also one big pressure that is always there on OEMs as well as component manufacturers, because at the end of the day, every cost increase that happens, the customer will have to bear those costs. So, there were axle load norms post that, you had BS6, where you had increase in prices, fuel costs are going through the roof. At that point of time, how do you manage these, kind of increase in costs? Because you can't pass on, kind of the entire cost. So do you look at creating substitutes? Are you working on various substitutes, for existing products that you have in terms of different metal combinations, which could bring down prices, lightweighting, or, re-engineering certain stuff, value engineering, etc. What is it that, you guys have done over a period of last couple of months, Tom, and if you could throw some light, as to how do you see this entire thing shaping up? Because, with power outages going to continue in China for next couple of months, Europe also being through some tough situation with respect to energy availability. This is here to stay for some time. It is difficult to predict when prices would stabilize or go down, but, uncertainty is here to stay for some time. So in this scenario, how are you kind of managing all this at your end?
Well, it's worthy of just making a quick comment back on the the sort of the genesis of it, so that it's clear. Because for us to react to something, we need to know if it's a structural change that sustains, like axle load as a regulation, or if it's actually what we call a spike, and it's up and then back down. And there's a huge difference of our behavior towards some issue. It's also interesting if you look at the genesis of this. It has very much to do with China, no doubt. China's steel prices are very high. Global steel prices are very high. Truth is, they don't need to be. The mills around the world have, they don't have very many nice days where they get to make some real money. This is one of those, sunny days on the steel industry. So they don't have a cost problem today. They're not passing on cost challenges to us. And I can model that for anyone on this call if you'd like to have a private conversation. We know steel really, really well. So they have an opportunity and they're taking it. And so we're being a bit in the industry of India, we're being back leveraged right now. They're able to sell into the what we call the intermediate markets of Vietnam and so forth. They're able to sell at a very high level. They never dumped steel into those markets at a profit. It was always at a loss, India mills. So now they get to put money in there. And so they've really been throwing a lot of steel, highest exports ever in the history of India right now into those markets. So we're clear with what's happened. And when will this go back down? And, all indications suggest it's got a couple more months, maybe into next year, before there's any type of what we'll call the beginning of a cycle. Where does it go to? We know where it goes to. Global steel prices should be $650, $700 a ton, and they're sitting up in 1,000 right now. So there's a big fall coming. What do we do in the meantime? That was your question, right? What do you do? So we, as a company, we have a great little cute phrase inside called the war on steel. So we're not thrilled with our steel partners, back leveraging our industry, because it creates inflationary forces on us. So if you can imagine us, we're sitting here with a customer who's saying, I can't pay any more for a truck because my customer is going to go to rail. So there's a lot of pressure on me as an owner operator of a fleet. And there's us pushing all the regulations of the government up on them. And then we added steel on top. It's just too much. So we've been really, really struggling with this dynamic. And you'll notice even in our results, we've called off the steel impact on us. So it's a devastating body blow. As soon as we can figure out the bottom, we'll do that. But as a business, no, you can't watch and wait and pass it on to your customers. So first, we can't pass it on. Number one. Number two, it is a margin hit. Number three, and we've declared that. I'm not telling you anything now. We've already declared to our analysts and investors what's happening. But number three is, you get busy, and so you do alternate materials. So, and I'll just give a simple example. You move to a plastic tank instead of a welded structure. And that's not good for the guys that are out there producing welded structures in tank form, because you're a completely different process. And so this is one of the great, miseries of being in our industry. Sometimes you're that supplier that's actually doing the other thing, and forces drive us away from, A to B. And so that's not lost on us, the impact. So that's what you do. It's a massive program. Our businesses are fired up to get away from steel. And to be honest with you, we have had our steel mills also play with supplies so much that there's a part of us also that would say, good riddance. We're tired of all the games of manipulating supplies for pricing actions and so forth. So that doesn't exist in any other markets that much. It's really unique to this country. Having bought steel all over the world, I can tell you that's a fact. So it's something we're also keen to get away from, is all the start-stop maneuverings on steel supply, especially into our tier one partners. They have a real hard time getting steel at times. And so, there's a motivation for us to say, let's try to move away from that. And there's also a big force that's coincidentally happening for us on lightweighting. And so with steel being so high, it really justifies a lot of lightweighting programs. So this is encapsulating our war on steel is really about lightweighting, preponing lightweighting ideas, spending a little extra money on lightweighting, and coming up with better options. It's a very, very active space right now, this year live.
Fantastic. Something very new that I've come across, creating steel war rooms. Amazing. Mr. Ravi Kumar, what is it that you guys, have done at your end, I'm sure you guys would also work very closely with OEM partners and, try to develop either alternate materials, lightweighting, as, Tom was referring to. So what is it? How has this situation been at your end? How have you as a company attacked this entire situation?
Yeah. in general, we have the what you call a CCR, a continuous cost improvement initiatives, and the new product development has been a part of our DNA. We take WAPCO India in particular. So this has also been one of the strong pillars for WAPCO being successful in the marketplace, because we always strive to work with the OEMs and offer a solution which will make them successful as well as help us to differentiate. So that has been our approach. So we had a very structured and focused process within the organization, and particularly during this crisis, because it has been unprecedented in terms of the commodity inflation. So we had set up war rooms to critically look at value engineering across all the products. What are the opportunities are there? When it comes to alternate materials, as for steel, so we also hire certain consultants, etc., from the industry to also go through the process of sheet thickness, alternate materials, and we also collaboratively work with OEMs, for example, even Tata's, I would say. So wherever we have where they are able to offer a better solution. So we are taking that. So if you take alternate materials, even the plastic resin, because that also has been one of the challenges, both in terms of availability as well. So it was much more necessary to look at alternate material. So we have been working on various by-product, and with, as I said earlier, on digitalization with analytics and simulations. We're also looking at how we are able to improve the efficiency in terms of procurement, etc. So these are some of the initiatives that we have done. But having said that, I'd say the recent commodity increases are also still significant or unprecedented. Sometimes it's necessitates a pass-through across the supply chain, right? So this is also we are trying to work with collaboratively, I would say, because finally we need to be sure that we are competitive. So we work collaboratively on these areas.
Great, great. No, I think we've almost spent half of the time when discussing how we've navigated through tough times, through COVID. Let's now try and focus on something which is, a very, very severe, supply shock at this point of time across the industry. And, you pick up any newspaper any day in the morning, you will at least read about semiconductor or chips. So that's a topic, which is very, very, kind of talked about and is very, very pressing for the industry at this point of time. And even, in the commercial vehicle industry, what we are seeing is increasingly with BS6 coming in, lot many technologies being built in the vehicle, the usage of sensors, chips or microprocessors has gone up substantially. And the hit is even more harder in the smaller commercial vehicles, as we understand. But, it's slowly, gradually also getting into the M&HCV side. So from that perspective, even for an ABS, you would require a chip, So that is how it is. And, now every vehicle has to be fitted with ABS. So over a period of time, how are you seeing this situation? Because, we come across various people in the, kind of entire supply chain who say that, this is going to get over by the next quarter, probably at the end of 2 to 3 months, we'll see the supply getting back, it'll get back to normalcy. So, it's about next 2 months, next 3 months. But, at the end of 3 months, we are again there. Or, in fact, the situation has gone worse off as compared to what it was earlier. So how are you looking at this entire situation? Do you actually see any light at the end of the tunnel, Tom? Do you see this situation improving, or you still feel, the situation is here to continue for some time?
Was that to me or to Ravi Kumar?
You could start, and probably Ravi could add on.
Okay. Well, gosh, it's what I do every day. So you are right about that. We have task forces have been working since November, actually late October, even last year. The first call we got, I think, was October. We've taken a proactive stance on this. I'll say this so everybody has sort of a view. So I have every part in our company that has a semiconductor mapped to the semiconductor. We know what we don't buy any Tata Motors. We buy them all through suppliers. We've mapped every supplier, every semiconductor by type down to the foundry where the wafer fab is created. So we modeled everything so we'd understand, the root of the problem. We found a lot of confusion between how OEMs order things, tier ones order things, and so forth. So many may not know, as an example, that the majority of parts that are semiconductors that are ordered by automotive globally are ordered not through the semiconductor company, but through the distributor. So we're so small to them by virtue of what we do that we just buy through a distributor in bulk quantities, but still through a distributor. So the idea of you having long-term contracts and securing supply and so forth is more vulnerable when you're in a distribution network versus a direct relationship with the semiconductor supplier. So it's an important fact that people just didn't really understand. Prioritization of what they were doing, long lead contracts. People use all these terms of noise. It's a big charade. The semiconductor industry did not have enough capacity with or without COVID. Period. COVID just preponed a problem that was clearly there. If you look at the physicals of it, our industry, their industry has a big mismatch. Now, we've talked to them and they said they were getting ready for us. It's an interesting perspective. They were getting ready in the sense, what does it mean? They were adding capacities for the future of things like ADAS or, driver assist, connectivity, mobility, et cetera. So they saw these movements coming, electrification as well. They saw the movements coming. They saw these technology trends coming and they were planning on that, but they were planning on that later. And so truth be told, they're really not ready for that. They certainly were not ready for the big purge of consumer electronic demand that came with COVID. So I think as a result of it all, we get left wanting, and they have accused our industry of not ordering properly during COVID. But the reality is that there's evidence that the orders were still there and that it was just, again, a facade to say we're just going to sell to who we can, and we had a hot market. And right now, they'll be renegotiating contracts with people like Ravi Kumar to say, guess what? The semiconductors now cost more. And so there's going to be this is all happening live. It's all behind the scenes. There's not a lot of media on this, but this is what's really happening. So what do you do? Two options. You can wait, and so you can be assured that your competition is not getting any more than you. And so you'd say, if we're getting 60%, they're getting 60%. And so no one gets to win the fight that we have every day at the dealer level about who sells a car, because we're all in the same boat. The problem with that model is that if you're trying to grow, or if you're trying to launch any new product or do any of the things that we normally do, and by the way, our customers are a highly responsive, very well-known fact to fresh product, relevant product. And so we're always trying to not just make regulatory compliant things, but the right product for whatever fit for purpose TCO objective we have for a customer. So we're always trying to create some value for a customer, but there's no point investing anything because essentially you're just cannibalizing something else. So there's no win for an OEM when you're in allocation. And people just need to sort of digest that reality. It's a brutal reality. But when somebody's playing God with your chip allowance, and they're 3 layers removed from you and there's no one to call. So you say, well, I guess we're all going to wait this out. Running our business at 60% strength on a particular product because of that, and then having them tell you maybe a year, maybe not. And so forth. So if you actually modeled that and said, well, when does relief come? I don't see relief coming for at least a year. And it's going to hit people. It is hitting people in some really critical parts that are hard to change out of. So the application-specific circuits that are embedded into ECUs, these are microprocessors that are very difficult to redesign. They're also usually designed by somebody and then contracted to one of the wafer fab houses, TSMC or Global Foundries. And so these companies are essentially just playing allocation with an ASIC, and so you end up with being cut off at an allocation model. Done. No discussion to be had. And with that, you find yourself essentially saying, I guess we'll just wait. And you go back to everything I just mentioned. There's no point in that business. I think if you're smart, you have to take a bold call. You have to ask yourself the following question. If this, hypothetically, if demand actually continues to stay up for what we call the back-end foundry business, if it stays high, and there's a continued shortage for 3 years, what would you do? What would you do? And when you ask that question, I think you sort of wake up. And so we've essentially reverse engineered our entire company under that premise to say, if nothing gets better for 3 years, what would you do now? And why would I spend on a new car if I can't make it? Why would I not maybe re-engineer something that I'm actually stuck with? And so we've been doing alternate chip design actions. We've been doing alternate supplier design actions. We've been doing alternate fit and function design actions. And so we've put everything on a paper, and we're rewarding our teams in these white space sessions to say, the crazier the idea, the better, because we don't want people coming in saying why they can't make crazy changes. We actually want to unlock the crazy ones. And so, yeah, this has been an inspiring moment to, it's miserable. And if you actually wallow in it, it'll suffocate you. And so we're trying to flip it on its head and say, you know what, let's get a little nutty about where you can go as a company. And if you do that, and you work with, individuals like Ravi Kumar, you can have a conversation now to say, look, we're going to go spend money with you. Let's go do something. How do we change out of this? And so you'd say, well, it's a 2-year program to engineer that, validate, get it certified. Okay, let's do it in 1. And so these discussions, this is what the OEMs are. I hope the good ones wake up and start doing this. And then we're going to find all of our engineering resources are tapped out, trying to re-engineer parts on already existing cars just so we can make them. But this is a healthy reaction. And we're also going to wake up one day and realize the semiconductor companies, they're not looking at auto saying, how can we best take care of you? They're basically self-serving at this point. And I don't blame them, but we need to start taking care of our own destiny a bit more than we did in the past. Modeling is great. Watching allocation is frustrating. Buying open market chips and funneling them through your channel partners. We do all that stuff, but it's not changing the monthly allocation reality, and it's not getting any better. And I have not had a single semiconductor supplier tell me that they have a light at the end of their tunnel. A bit of tough love.
But that's more realistic, and that is what everybody would want to know. So 3 very important points that you brought across. One, the auto industry is still dependent on these chips through distributors, so there is no direct contact, which is one big point. Second, I would say you were still saying that at least there is another 1 year through which this entire situation will kind of go around, and it's not going to be very easy. Third, what I really like is, again, the auto industry is trying to make an opportunity out of this particular situation that is there, where you guys are trying to do something where you could, probably either reduce the intensity of semiconductors in a vehicle, or develop something, where your dependence on that particular part goes down over a period of time. And you have set yourself a target internally, which is very, very good to, kind of hear, and heartening to hear that even in such times, you guys are thinking in a direction which is far more structural, rather than just going with the flow that, yes, it may end tomorrow, it may end day after. Because with the number of uncertainties that we are seeing globally, and especially, with, sorry to use that word, but with, someone like China being the joker in the pack, you actually do not know in which way this entire tide is going to turn. Because there is geopolitics now with power outages, it will impact manufacturing. So, in which way all these things will turn around. So it is very difficult to predict as to, for how long will it last. So, great views there, Tom. Any input from your side, Mr. Ravi Kumar, as to how are you guys, kind of?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question and much talked about these days. And you need to be concerned about it every day. You cannot keep, away. So first of all, I would say so far so good. First, thanks to our supply partners and also some support from the global teams. We have been able to ensure uninterrupted supplies till date to all our customers. As Black was saying, so we also use the distribution route to ensure, okay, we need to pay a little bit of higher price, but then that ensures the availability as of now. But what it is industry is today, I would say, is going through what I call is a toilet paper syndrome, right? So there is always a mad rush for this. At a high level, the auto market has a high dependency on the TSMC, right? And then I would say auto industries is competing against other segments, particular. No more automotive is no longer gets the highest priority. So that's the fact. So to what extent is it currently very difficult to predict? Flack has said for next 1 year, so difficult to predict. But what we are trying to do is we have visibility for 1 quarter. I would say for 1 quarter ahead at any point of time. But the planning horizon has extended. So earlier when we started, it was 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4. Now it's almost 6 quarters now. So I need to plan for 18 months of thing. Then only I am able to at least have move forward and then adjust, so that I cannot go every time to the distribution. And what another important point Mr. Tom Flack brought about is on the what we are doing on the design stage of our future. So now we have brought in a kind of a golden principle in design to check if the if our product design utilizes contemporary technology, right, especially in the field of chips, etc., so that to avoid risk of obsolescence, or otherwise having a legacy kind of a design, so that to ensure that this availability is ensured. When it is contemporary, then you have a good chance to put your hand to get those on the availability. So these are some things that is happening at our end.
One more thing, related to it, and, probably Tom touched upon it, but, I would want to know a little more details is that with electrification happening, with this all new talk around ESG, sustainability, environmental, governance, and with a lot of countries committing to the Paris Climate Agreement, where you need to reduce your emissions, etc. And with more electric vehicles coming in, do you actually see that this is far from over and this is only going to aggravate over a period of time as electrification increases? Because, electric vehicles would use far more number of chips and semiconductors as compared to what, normal ICE vehicle would use.
I think even for the current volumes of current models, when we have this kind of a challenges, obviously it is very obvious that this is going to continue, right? This challenge will be there in the future as well. Right. But unless we attack it at the design stage to ensure that we have the right chips which is available, so there could be a chance you'll end up in a big issue. So we need to be approach at the design stage and then look at those designs of what we have.
Sure. Yeah, Tom, you want to add something or?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So if you just look at a vehicle profile of what we're doing as we go, say, to 2025. The number of chips grows substantially. So by virtue of technology choices, if you go to 2030, that's when you really pick up ESG. I mean, it's not paper talk. It's legit. We're legitimately doing these things. It doubles. Not just straight up, it doubles. So what you also realize is the funny thing, but if I actually say I'd like to source this part from you for this technology, which inherently has embedded electronics, you're going to say, okay, well, we've set that up, and yes, that's okay, and we've got confirmation that we can get the chips from somebody, but we actually don't have it. They don't have the capacity today, and they haven't added it up, and they don't even model their business that way. So to make an example of, I don't want to pick a name of a semiconductor supplier, but semiconductor supplier X doesn't actually have capacity for that auto customer. They don't do that. So our whole system of securing, creating it is something that has to, there's a need for what I'll call industry-wide override here. So what you said is true, but our ability to now plan for this with them is broken. And that's a real challenge that we can see. That's a misnomer. Right. I just wanted to highlight that aspect. So if you talk to a semiconductor supplier, they'll tell you, I don't know, I'm launching my new truck, and they go, who are you? I don't even know who you are. I don't know what your truck is. I'm working with, supplier X. Okay, I don't know them either. Right. They wouldn't call me about your program. They're buying my chip through, with the exception of ASICs, which they direct contract to me. With the exception of those, most of your business is through these distribution networks, and therefore there is a bit of what I'll call supply chain blindness that's inherently there for our industry. And the semiconductor suppliers are reaching out to us saying, we need to connect with you. So they're not being passive about it. They're saying there's a problem. We can't see you guys. We don't see your industry. We see it growing its needs, and we're really disappointing you. We know all your CEOs now. They're all calling us, but we don't see you operationally. And now they've come back, and I think Ravi Kumar kind of commented on it, or the toilet paper thing. They're saying, you guys are ordering, I'll give you an example. There used to be about 90 million passenger cars that you would order. Right now, the semiconductors are being ordered at a pace of 1.7 times that. And so they're saying one more new thing. We don't believe anything you're giving us.
Got it.
Our protocols are truly having some big breakages in them, and it's a time for us to do. And again, there's probably a digital solution in here, and you can only go so far as an individual OEM to protect yourself. But just to give you a sense of it's not solved. To be very transparent, it is not solved.
Great. That's a very valuable answer. Before moving on, one more question with respect to what's happening specifically in India, and probably that is a question where Tom, probably you would be I would like to pose it to you as an OEM. Is that if you look at the way in which the powertrain mix has kind of changed in the commercial vehicle industry. So now we are trying to focus from global also to the local part. So if you actually see CNG kits or gaskets, cylinders, availability has been a huge challenge because the demand has gone berserk. Fuel prices have gone through the roof. Diesel prices have crossed 100. But if you actually see the number of CNG vehicles being sold, so if you look at small commercial vehicles that less than 3.5 tons, it's been more than 20% sales coming from CNG variant. Similarly, in the ICV variant, it's as high as 30 to 40%. And initially, it was in the range of sub 10% or at max 10 to 12%. Now this becoming 3x of what it was earlier. Is it more to do with a demand supply mismatch, and hence the suppliers are not able to supply, or do you also have a supply issue here, or there are vendors available, but it is only because of this mismatch that this is getting a little tough at this point of time and will get resolved over a period of time?
It's actually a little both. It's a great question. So complicated story, but it's a little bit of both. So first of all, the CNG push is fundamentally regulatory based. It's a reaction to that. People have been, kind of going back and forth on what source of fuel will be most attractive. And I think if I was investing in that, so I don't blame the suppliers of that at all. If I was investing in that, I have probably grown a bit tired of I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out. This tendency of there being a bouncing ball because of these regulatory changes makes it very hard. And, if I had a perfect world, I'd have a facility that I can sell my part to you, whether it's petrol, diesel, CNG, or otherwise. And so I'm always, on. You tell me which variant you want. That sounds really nice. But for a lot of us, that's not the case. And then, for our side as an OEM, it's also miserable, to re-engineer all these options. There's a lot of inefficiency that inherently gets put into fixed costs of our product. So there's pressure kind of on all of us. And I think in combining that, then you have now just the lead time. So surprise, we're going to order a lot of tanks from you. And so I think they're is it real? Will it sustain? Really good. They push back appropriately. And so, if we could get more, we would make more. So there's pressure on what I'll call CNG components, but also CNGs require semiconductors too. So there's also, a shortage of being able to say I would make a CNG vehicle because I don't have the right semiconductor availability for that particular variant. Also, it's really a combination. I wouldn't call it all about CNG kits. No, I certainly wouldn't blame those suppliers. We have been a very hard act to follow to be able to supply in that space.
Got it. Now, moving towards concluding the session, if I would like to ask, one question to both of you, so in the post-COVID world, how do you see supply chains evolving, specifically in two areas? One, do you see, OEMs and tier ones keeping higher stocks as compared to earlier? Because, we've taken some time to move to a leaner inventory management structure, and, that's been that's a choice that we've made in order to cut the inventory costs and make the supply chain more agile and more JIT, if I have to say. Will this lead to some reversal in that trend? That is first question. And second, more from an OEM perspective towards tier one, and for a tier two, toward a tier one to their other tiers, tier two, tier three, and down the line. Will you look at more alternative suppliers as compared to what you are looking at today? Because over the last couple of years, what we've seen is OEMs have strengthened relationships with a couple of suppliers where they have assured quality, assured supply at a point of time, and so has been the case with tier ones with their tier twos to ensure that there is no break in the entire supply chain that you see. But now with this situation, will we see that changing? Or, as Tom also mentioned in between, that this is more like a cycle and this is not more structural. So you would continue what it is earlier. So, both of your views on this would be really helpful.
Okay, I take this question. No, I would like to say that the JIT or the agile, the lean will continue to stay, right? So our problems are currently very selective, focused towards the chip and other critical. So those areas, I think consciously we need to improve our planning horizon, and then we need to strategically keep some inventories on certain items. So it's not going to be you get into a different mode. So because you need to be competitive, obviously you need to work towards lean and JIT, etc. So from our perspective, what we are doing, for example, take our case, right? So for our customers, we say, what we are doing is we have the production locations that across all the plants, right? Across all the sites, footprint strategy. Right. Basically, that helps itself to have a de-risking, right? So I have a facility in Chennai, I have a facility in Jamshedpur, I have a facility in Lucknow, I have a facility in Pune or Pantnagar, etc. So this itself, and we have the facility to produce whenever, if you see any risk calls as well, we can do it. So in terms for the customer, we ourselves are giving a kind of a multiple locations advantage, etc. So there's no need for going in for a additional suppliers or etc. That point of view. So we are creating more the footprint strategy, I would say the planning, and then on the footprint, the more focus is on that. In fact, after the COVID, we have moved few more products towards nearer to the customer. So this will bring in the kinds of an agility. Now today the focus could be on the, I would say, on the localization. I would say more on the localization, because the new gen products or the technology product which was introduced in the Indian market predominantly followed a CKD route, right? So there is we have to put our hand on the localization in that area, right? So the thrust could be that the threat could be for localization, one, I would say. Second could be more of a planning. So planning, I would say, because with all the risks that we have seen, and planning, I think is much more now becomes important in terms of for the long lead time parts as well, and also for the even for the domestic parts, right? Sure. So I would not say, don't believe that we are going to away from the culture of the practices of lean or JIT or whatever it is. So it's going to be stay. It's only we need to be focused on where the problems are.
Sure. Fine, Mr. Ravi. Tom, your views there?
I think in inventory, it was paradoxical in the beginning because you're trying to slash inventory to preserve cash, and you don't have inventory to buffer your operations. So it was a bit of a mess, if I'm honest. I think, what do you take away? You go into smart inventories, and so you have to know where to keep it. There's a sweet spot, always a sweet spot. It's a question if your teams can find it in terms of who keeps it, how much you keep, and so forth. And you really need to understand the risks that are inherent in that supply chain. You have to look at scenarios that, make it tough. And so if you actually modeled yourself back to a China case, would you keep maybe an extra month's supply at your premises, offsite at a consolidation center, at a supplier site, warehouse, et cetera? But those are the right conversations that people are probably we're having more of, but people need to have more of, to identify how to actually buffer yourself. Carrying those inventories, none of us have had the levels of inventories that we probably should have in those smart areas. We've had the wrong inventories, in fact. So hopefully there's a netting there where you don't actually have a net, cost. There's an offset to getting smarter about it. My gut tells me that across the country, people are probably going to have to spend more on inventory. And then we're probably going to wake up and realize that we have to back off of it because we just can't afford it. It's too much. So there's going to be some burn on and churn on the idea of optimizing it. And it'll be a tough lesson for a lot of people. There's a lot of reactive work going on here. And even if you ask somebody to carry something for you, you've got to watch them because it doesn't mean it's necessarily being managed that way. So when you need it, it may not be there. Sure. Second point you raised, we're not out looking for lots of suppliers to deal with anything we learned from COVID. If anything, we're continuing to optimize our supply base as anyone would, balancing all the factors of performance. We're much better at balancing factors of performance. We used to be a price-focused OEM, so we do a much better job in terms of balancing. But Right now, for us, it's really going to be about adding suppliers that are going to do things like lightweighting, mobility, connectivity, electric fleet, the fuel cell fleet. So when we look at these technologies and the emergence of those, we see some traditional, migration to integrated castings versus stampings means I need a casting source that's probably a different grade of supplier than I may use today. Obviously, a fuel cell partnership is a brand new contract relationship, and so there'll be a lot of new names that come into the Tata family by virtue of the emergence of technology. I must have my hand on 30 of those, not like right now. So it's a very active space, but it's predominantly about setting the stage for the future. And I think that lightweighting thing, I mentioned that, but it's a nice one because it's a chance for a lot of local OEM suppliers, to really step up and to upgrade what they're capable of and engage us in ideas around lightweighting. So we're looking forward to those.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Ravi. Before we conclude, there are a few questions that we have. If you have another 5 to 7 minutes, we could answer a few of them. Yeah, Rohit.
Sure. So I'll jump straight to it. The first question is from Mr. Bala Subramanian Vaidyanathan. He says, can our auto industry become 100% free of supplies from China? So, which one of you would like to take that?
I'll go. Yeah, so technically, yes. Again, I could tell you of everything Tata buys, everything. About 15% of the value of what we buy comes from China, 15%, and it's embedded in the tiers. And I could undo all of it. So it's every single part down to what I'll call precious metals. You can't. So if you're going to get magnets, anything that goes in it's a motor anywhere in the world, it probably is getting some of its, the crazy precious metals that are in magnets. If anybody remembers those, I do. I used to buy them, things like molybdenum and so forth. If you're going to buy those things, you're going to buy them from China. So could you technically, disengage from them? I think you could at least get them so you'd have, maybe a motor supplier buying that in an independent country that was neutral. And that's in a hybrid strategy. So you could say, whatever I'm buying it. It's in, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, and therefore I'm able to buy from them because we're all part of an ASEAN relationship, as an example. So finding neutral places is my only comment. Otherwise, technically you could. It's just expensive. Okay, great.
Mr. Ravi Kumar, would you like to answer that, or should we move on to the?
No, as obviously, as I said earlier, we have a very strong localization plan, right? So I think we have a plans to localize. So it's 100% or not. We have a plan and we have a roadmap to localize it. But anyway, we're also looking at options of across the world. So it's not only per se China. We want it to be self-sustained as much as possible. Okay, there are parts which were like chips, etc. You have certain which you will not be able to do it. So other than that, at least to the extent we can de-risk.
Okay, great. And so there's this question, while you answered it from a semiconductor perspective. So Neeraj Kumar asks, is there a bubble, in aluminium and steel as well because of the race to ensure supply chain and over-ordering?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So that was simple.
No, I mean, you guys check with your analyst groups. You guys yourselves can give that feedback as an industry feedback, but that's all modeled and mapped. There's forecasts of when things calm down. I think the hardest part is if you talk to any of the agencies that are modeling forecasts, you're going to find that they're really struggling. A lot of their forecasts are based on a foundation algorithmically, and the foundation's been rocked. So the forecasts are a little sketchy. You need to look also at lead indicators. what does, for instance, the Evergrande situation in China do to real estate, do to steel demand in China? Does demand therefore take an oversupply? Does oversupply bring pricing down? The answer is yes. But does that give us a direct indication when steel will drop? The answer is no. So I think that piece is kind of there. Are they all sitting on bubbles? Everything in the world is sitting on a bubble right now in terms of commodities. There's no question about it. What's interesting, like electric vehicle batteries, is there's so much demand surging. Does the actual demand surge rise up to the COVID crisis? So it's not really clear. No one's talked about this, but electric vehicle batteries are going up by a lot. Not pricing, raw material costs are skyrocketing. When they come down, has there been a structural demand underneath that's really pushing them up as well? So I think for each company, you need to really talk to, again, the guys who are, hosting us here in terms of their outlook. And I hate to say this to the Crystal team, but I always get a second opinion so we can have a balance of what we see in the market. So, but it really is look for that lead indicator. That's our key. We always look for something that'll trigger it so we know that the rise has a fall.
Sure.
Okay, so one final question, and then we can, end this session. So this is from Rakshan, auto MSME supplier. So he says that visibility on operational cost is important across the value chain, be it OEMs to the MSME auto supplier. Right now, in his opinion, he feels that it's very difficult or challenging for an MSME to manage the operational expenses. So how can this visibility be increased or improved so that they can manage these expenses appropriately? Is something that he said.
Okay. Now, when it comes to MSME, yes, after the pandemic, because there are times that they had their business had completely dropped. Right, there have been fixed cost expenses. There are challenges, but I think they need to go in for a complete, I would say, an exercise on those operational costs. Right, looking at I would say adaptation to the digitalization, IoTs, and then low-cost automation. Right, because even the labor cost has increased significantly. So I think we need to get into our fundamentals of lean, low-cost solutions, adoption to IoTs, etc. To have a control, to have a check on those costs.
Great. So Hemal, would you like to sum this up, and then we can? Okay, Tom, you can add the front.
Just if I could add just a quick comment. So MSMEs are a big deal for us as an industry, and Ravi Kumar is correct. I also think there's a cash issue that's there that needs support. There's some damage caused by COVID that's harder when you're smaller, harder to endure. And so we have programs or other programs that are out there. There's ways of getting support through things like RXIL for cash payment. There's ways to get support. We have a thing called Tata Hub that people can join to get expertise. And there's also areas where you may seek out to get your customer to give you proper MSME support. It's a big deal for us. If I may, MSMEs are kind of the fabric that keep all of us alive, and it sometimes gets overlooked. So, screen, if I may use a phrase, just to reach out to you as an individual asking a question, but on behalf of all the MSMEs, we need them. We need them to be vibrant. And so we've been really putting a lot of focus on putting programs in place. But to be honest, a lot of the MSMEs are blended into the tiers. And so they're not immediately accessible by us. So a lot of these programs we have that are exciting and helpful aren't always available to the direct companies. And so just, I think, being mindful of that is something that we speak to ACMA about as a fraternity of a supplier community. And it's something that it needs more attention, if I may, beyond just the operational suggestions. There's a huge cash issue, and there's a need for a better focus to keep these companies vibrant. Not to mention, with all these technology changes going on, as an MSME, it's hard to know where to put the very few dollars you have for investment into the technology. So all these are on the mind. So I've expanded your question a bit, but I think it's an important one, and it just to make sure, for at least for the Tata family, it's a big deal. This is the fabric of the country, of the country.
Oh, great.
I would say auto industry has been one of the industries that in a way has lend support to, MSME suppliers, OEMs to tier 1s and down, and again tier 1s down to, the tier 2, tier 3. We've come across very many situations during the pandemic where we've spoken to a lot of MSME suppliers where they have really appreciated the kind of support the industry at largest lend. Probably not very similar to what other industries have done, but auto industry has really lived up to it. Yes, I agree that not 100% can be taken care of, because there will always be some ifs and buts. But yes, to a large extent, I would still say that relatively well managed, at least in a situation which is very, very uncertain.
Sure. Hemal, would you like to conclude by a quick sum up?
I would just say it's been a fantastic discussion, with Tom and Ravi. I really didn't realize in the last hour or so passed by. Challenging times. I am, very happy and thrilled to hear that, you are looking at this more from an opportunity perspective, from a mid to long term perspective and, working towards it in that direction. So, we've heard about many things, where you are going to use AI, ML, etc., to optimize things. You're looking at value engineering, you're looking at lightweighting. So, many things going on the go. Plus, what I also like, one specific point that was mentioned is to de-risk yourself from, the current way of, kind of functioning. And the example there for semiconductors was, that the intensity in a vehicle has gone up multifold. As it went up from about 1 to 1.7, though the volumes have not gone up, which only gives you that, going forward, it's going to aggravate even further. And if we still sit today thinking that, this is not going to be an issue or this is going to get over very soon, probably may not be the right judgment to make at this point of time. But, that also gives an indication that, we'll have to work towards it collectively to ensure that we come out of this and win this situation. That's it, I would say from my side.
Great. Thank you all for joining today.